we are not properly understanding how to scale the assets that we have. Let me tell you something, my people. It makes no sense to have assets, right, that you're not going to try to grow over the course of time, because what's going to happen is as you get into the fourth quarter of your life, whether you have a business or whether you have land or whether you have properties, whatever it is, if you're not scaling those things, if they're not producing income, if they're not producing revenue, if they're not producing cash flow, ultimately what happens is they become a cost center for you. They become a headache for you. They become a liability for you. So by the time you get in the fourth quarter, if you got 20, 40, 80, 60, 100 acres of land, if all you're doing is paying taxes on that land, there's nothing coming out of that land, there's nothing going on that land, then essentially what's going to happen is when you get into that time where you're making less money and you're commanding less money because you're getting older and it's harder to make money, that is going to be a cost center to you, and it's going to be a headache for you, liability, and you're going to want to liquidate it. And when you liquidate an asset, it goes back into the box and we move in the opposite direction. And if you only have if that's the only option you have, now, like I said, there's no problem with liquidating. You can sell whatever you want to sell. I'm not saying selling is a bad thing. Ultimately, we all want to sell for the highest price at the end of the day. But if we're looking to hold an asset that we want to keep in our family and pass down from generation to generation and have that asset provide some security and some nurturing to us, then we have to invest in that when the time is right. That means early. That doesn't mean wait until the end of your life to go, oh, well, all I'm doing is paying taxes on this, so I'm going to go ahead and sell it, right? That's why in your second quarter, third quarter, halftime, first quarter, you need to be looking at how to acquire assets, and not only acquire assets, we have to learn how to grow assets. So those assets are over the course of time are feeding us and feeding us and feeding us residuals. And then it gets so big that it gets to the point where we can pass that down from generation to generation to generation. If we get to a place where we just give the asset back at the end of our lives, then that asset is, and it hasn't produced anything for us altogether, then we just paid to hold something, and then we gave all that money back. And if you know anything about what's going on today, the asset is appreciating. What you're trading for the asset, which is the dollar, is depreciating. So you're actually trading for something that's going down in value. You see what has happened is we bought into the system. The system, you know, and this is why you got to understand cycles, my people. You got to understand cycles of what's going on and what's important. It's not always the same. This is why rich people go broke, right? It's because they don't understand the cycles of value, right? It's about the cycles of value. And right now, when we were coming up, the value was to go into the marketplace, get a degree. That degree was valuable because then you could take that degree, and that degree commanded you a certain amount of money each and every year, right? You could get a job. Now that value proposition is changing. Now the value proposition is not so much degrees anymore, right? It's not so much about going in debt and getting degrees and buying into that system, because what that system did is it pulled you away from the system that allows you to have time to grow the asset, right? So now we ignored the asset for 20, 30, 40 years. And now at the end, the asset is going up, but we haven't put anything into the asset because we bought into this system. Now, I'm not saying anything is wrong with education and getting your degrees. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is you got to understand how the value proposition flows.
So, William, you know, I love that video. I thought it was pretty much, that's the basis for the discussion. Gaining assets, growing assets. You talked about a lot. You probably haven't seen that video yourself for a month now. So whatever it sparks in your head to kind of add on to, I would love to hear your thoughts, King.
Well, obviously there was a lot of passion behind that because it was twofold for me. So I was trying to acquire land, which was very emotional for me because that land had been in a family, in our family for some time, or some family members, or at least our community. And what I was trying to do was to make sure it stayed that way. That land got away from us, right? So it no longer belongs to us in terms of our race. And it was sold for under market value. So I was very, very emotional about the way it all went down, right? Which is not my biggest issue. Business is business. I understand that. I do the same thing from a business perspective. I look for the opportunity. I think that's just capitalism 101, right? You look for the cheapest buy so you can make the biggest return. That's business. The problem I have, or the issue I have, is exactly kind of what I stated, which is my mother's going through this, so it's emotional for me too, because you know my mother's had she's been a solopreneur for 30 years, right? She's owned a flower shop, and you know I'm a big picture guy. I'm a scalability guy, and you know, but I moved away from my mom, so I've never been involved in the family business that she started 30 years ago. I kind of did my own thing, but I've always had this conversation with her, and she's from the old school, and I always told her, I said, Mom, at some point, you're not going to be able to do what you do by yourself anymore. And I know you love what you do, right? And I know you love how you do what you do, right? And she's an Aquarius. You know, I'm big in astrology, and she likes to do things on her own. She's a very controlled person. She's been very successful. She's built a business that generates 30 grand a month with just B2B business, not even retail business. She can sit still, and where her relationships that she's built over 20 years, she can generate $30,000 just off of business, right? Which she likes. That's cool for her. But now what happened is, here recently, she had a health scare, right? And so that health scare, she had a bleeding in her brain, right? And she had a lot of stroke. And now, physically, she can't give the business what she's always given the business. So now she's in a predicament because, and I used to have this conversation with her, Mom, you gotta start to scale. You gotta bring people in. You gotta understand how to remove you from the business. You've had 30 years, right? And what you've never done is you've never invested into the business so that the business is an entity and stand on its own. So when you're ready to sit down, or even before you sit down, that business is able to do what it needs to do for you. And so you're not tied to it. So when you don't get to this place, like I talked about in the fourth quarter, where now you have this issue where you got two options, right? My mother got two options. She can sell it. It's kind of what I talked about with the land, right? Or she can, what's the other option? I forget the other option she had, but both of them are basically options where she pretty much has to put it back in the box, so to speak. And so my biggest thing that I want my entrepreneurs and everybody to understand is phase one is starting the business, which is what we all, right, are pretty much on the same page of doing. Stage 2, 3, 4, and 5 is when you get that business or that land or that asset or whatever it is, it's how are you going to scale that so you can remove yourself so that it can stand on its own. And we have to, we have to get better at doing that. We have to get better at growing these assets and reinvesting back into these assets and understand that this is a bit of a long game. Yes, it is, but we have to understand that, I think a lot of people get caught up in today, right? Short game. I'm an investor, so I always look at short and long. It's two ways you do things, short, long, right? So you got your short play, you got your long play. They both have their place, right? Short game has its place. I call it a money grab. We talked about that before. And the long has its place. And that's the residual revenues, the long game, what we can pass down, how we can build wealth for our longevity, like Asians do, like Indians do, like Middle Easterns do, like everybody else does. They invest in their community, they invest in themselves. And one question we always ask ourselves is, why does it seem like when we have tragedies that happen to other people or other communities, why it seems like they get more action faster? Well, it's because they have more leverage based on these long-term strategies that they do around business, because they're able to feed more influence into getting those things taken care of, right? And if we just focus on being solopreneurs, right, such as the example I gave, what happens is, yeah, we can have a lifestyle, but what happens ultimately at the end is it gets predicated upon. And trust me when I tell you, when I say predicated, even some of our own people go to other people and go, look, I got a deal for you. I got this old lady. She got 80 acres. She don't want it no more, right? And you can get it as long as you throw me something back. And that happens in our community if we don't, and I always say it, especially with land, we got to put something on it or we got to get something out of it. We can't just hold that land and pay taxes on it, because essentially in 30 years, the thing that really makes me upset is that lady just attained the money back. If she made money, she probably, based on her taxes every year, she probably just broke even based on what she sold it for. Because over the years, all she did was pay taxes on it to say it's mine. You understand? And so that's kind of the gist.
That's a great breakdown, brother.